Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. We actually have a whole half hour for discussion, so that's quite a lot of time. So I won't even urge you to only make short questions. You can actually give some comments if things don't get too out of hand. Yes.
I guess I need to make a few comments about. I guess we need to be careful while we're trying to understand what's happening about Arab Spring, Arab Winter, Arab revolts that is going on. That we all don't know where it's heading at the end. While we're trying to understand what is happening, we need to be careful again, not making generalization. Simple generalization. As some of the speakers has mentioned it, each peculiar case has to be evaluated within its own environment. So I fully agree with this. And also we need to be careful about the role model of Turkey. This has been so many times has mentioned. According to my viewpoint, I don't believe that Turkey is a model. There are many models. Everyone has its own model. But why? Because, as it's been said at the beginning, do you mind if I speak like this?
Yeah.
Okay. It helps. Sort of. Okay, I'll try my best. About when I was making a precaution that we need to be careful of not making simple generalization. About the system, the governance of Turkey, we need to be careful. It's still a secular system. Even Eşber has mentioned it. Erdogan himself, during his tour to a few countries in the Middle East, like Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya, he said himself that he is a religious person himself. He believes in Islam and he practices. But he mentioned it and highlighted, underlined it, that he's representing a country of a secular one. So according to the constitution-wise and the structures that is still persists in the country, Turkey is a secular country. We don't have Sharia. We need to be aware of this. So this guides us to not get lost in making comparisons. This is very important. And secondly, why she can't be a model? In my viewpoint, and as along with my academics that they believe in, so like the mindset they have similar to mine, it could be an inspiration if anyone is eager to inspire from it. It is since 1923 she has practiced a democracy. It had some setbacks along the journey, but it's still trying to move on. She has already has been accepted that she has fulfilled the Copenhagen criteria, but she has a long way to go in terms of meeting the criteria of EU and so on and so forth. We're aware of it. So that's another reality. It's a parliamentary democracy. And you can see it, the representations in the parliament. Of course we're having problems. That we cannot deny it. That's a matter of fact on the ground. So she's different. And also if we come to, apart from political side to economic-wise, she's also different. She has accepted liberal market economy and she's practicing it. So in that wise, she's also different. So there are other differences that you may pick up. But I'm saying that we need to be careful as posing her as the model. It's not a model. It's peculiar in its own region. And she's not only Middle Eastern country. She's also part of Caucasus. She's also part of Balkans. And, it has in its roots different characters and different tastes, let's speak so. So that's why I can say that it could only have inspiration if anyone is eager to pretend it or adopt it. But so far as I've seen the elections in Tunisia, the Nahda party has mentioned that they're going to stick to Islamic rules, even though it has been said that the AKP's party program has been inspired and so on and so forth. We cannot say that it is the same thing. So this is the thing that I would like to share with you, and also about her openings at the end of the Cold War period. So it has not started with AKP only. We need to be careful about this too. Turkey's multi-approach foreign policy towards its neighborhood, not only the Middle East, has started a bit ago. So like 80s or so, even before you can trace the roots of it. So, and this has happened not because of her preference. There were some easing factors. It was the end of Cold Wars. The superpower overlay has over, and that is how the regions came into fore of calculations. So regional security has started to matter. And then that is how we need to breathe, and the states of the region has gained some confidence and decided to take a role in the region. So this is another matter of fact that Turkey has found itself due to the change in regional matters. And also it is the capacity that she has built it in economic-wise and in otherwise that has helped her to be in the region, as if being a candidate status at the EU, she has decided to go and follow the rules of cooperative security, which was very wiseful. I mean, why should you spend more money in guns than butters? So this is another reality. I mean, that is why she wanted to have a zone of peace if she could achieve it. She seemed to be achieving till the Arab revolts have come. Nobody was expecting it. I don't think Davutoğlu was expecting it too. We all both caught in, all of a sudden one night we had the revolts. So look at the relations with Syria, where we have come to that point. Yesterday there was attacks to embassy in Syria. So things can change. About Turkey-Israel relations, we should be careful and not to exaggerate it. This is why we are here, the academicians, civil society, and this is why we are here to build bridges upon the opportunities that arise. And there will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well,
Professor Seto and then Carlo Masala.
Thank you very much, first to all the speakers for the excellent overview and presentation. Really set a wonderful stage. The late friend Halliday talked about the Iranian Revolution as a modernizing movement. Now, you may or may not agree with that premise, but if you do, then it's an interesting dimension to examine what has happened over the last few years. Clearly, the modernizing movement in Iran has failed, but clearly it has succeeded in Turkey. And one recognition of that is, as you mentioned, the return of the third time, but absolute democratic means. And I think that's an interesting model to think about, looking right across the region, that these are really movements for modernization. But I think it's also equally important to highlight the democratic challenge to that. And if these movements are not able to deliver on the modernization process, then if these remain democracies, those parties will be out. That seems to be clear. Now, it is possible that you may have some kind of a coup or some other kind of a subversion of the constitutional system as has been raised. That's an important element that we need to think about. So it provides a window of opportunity. Second, I was very much struck from what you were saying about how all the countries in the region have to think very carefully about the repercussions of their actions. And you gave the example of Israel and Egypt in that particular instance. And two things sort of came to my mind. One was that if you look again at all of the street, including Egypt, but of course Egypt is the most immediate neighbor of Israel, as Elizabeth mentioned, Palestine has not been an issue. And almost by default, Israel has not been an issue. In any of these movements, nobody has got up and said, Israel is the problem. That to me also seems like a window of opportunity. Again, I qualify that Egypt is the exception, it's an immediate neighbor, etc., etc. But it also underlines an important fact that perhaps this is also an opportunity for Israel in particular, I think, to be cautious about any kind of movement which maybe seem to be adventurous. Because I think that could have a repercussion across the region which may be unintended. But I think that is one sort of element. And the last thing that I want to come back to is really a point that Elizabeth, you made about, and in fact General Bro made as well, about the three leaders in the region, Israel, Iran, and Turkey. And I'm immediately struck by what a pity that the three are not working together to provide the leadership necessary for this transition. And what a pity that two of them are actually coming closer to each other than the third one. And here I'm just struck by the experience of Eastern Europe. And to see, and again, of course, you cannot translate the experience of one region to the other, and you shouldn't. But are there lessons from there that we might want to think about in this region, into sort of trying to be inclusive of countries that we may not think of, or trying to establish security structures which are inclusive rather than exclusive in a way, to provide that kind of security which may solve a lot of the issues as well. It's a big task, I know, but I thought I'd throw it out there. Thank you.
Okay, come to Carlo. I think we're already seeing the advantage of having international participation in our conference.
Thank you for the interesting presentations. I would like to ask a couple of questions and make one remark, which takes up on the whole Turkish model. I think we should be more precise and we should talk about the effectiveness of the AKP model. I mean, it's not the Turkish model in the sense that it's a Muslim society and secular state. It's the attractiveness of having an Islamic party coming via democratic election into power and staying into power and being able also to be internationally recognized. This is what probably makes Turkey so attractive, not the old traditional. When we talk about the Turkish model, we have in mind the old Atatürk model of the Turkish society. That's not the case. It's the AKP model. And of course Erdogan is so popular because, I mean, he's considered as the guy who stands up against Israel and the US, who has the guts to do this, which Mubarak didn't have, which Assad didn't have. That makes him so popular and attractive. So it's the AKP model. And semantically, we should talk about this attractiveness and not of the Turkish model. The second remark is arms control. I mean, I'm not a particularly big fan of arms control, and I don't think that there is a very attractive future right now for arms control. But what is the problem right now, in which people should really bang their heads, is disarmament. Because we have weapons flowing in Libya, probably in a couple of months in Syria too. We still have the militias in Iraq, and I mean, these forces are posing a much bigger problem than the old traditional, conventional, arms control. Most of you are talking about and you have in mind when you talk arms control. So I think this is really the problem of the future if we talk about weapons and conventional weapons in the Middle East. Two questions. One goes to Shlomo. You mentioned the recent Egyptian-Israeli relations, but isn't this due to the fact, let's be very blunt, that we still have responsible forces in Egypt in power? So, I'm talking about the military council. So, and probably, and I'm pretty sure that my European fellows, and probably also the Americans, are stupid enough to push for getting the military out of politics and having, this kind of civilian control over the armed forces, which could change the situation dramatically with regard to Egyptian-Israeli relations. So, just to make the point, is it due to the specific current nature of the regime in transition that Egyptian-Israeli relations are in such a good shape and problems can be solved very quickly? To follow up on that, and I pretty sure that no one wants to give a positive answer to that. Could the best thing that happens to the Egyptian constitution be a copy of the Turkish constitution of '82 after the coup d'etat? Which basically means, prima facie, you have democratic elections and everything else, but the military retains a kind of veto right over certain issues, and I would include foreign and security policy. From an Israeli perspective, I'm speaking now as a German, as an outsider, it looks to me that this would be the best political system you can have with your relation vis-à-vis Egypt. And the question to Professor Sasa, I was really impressed by your talk. But am I right in assuming that, in principle, your assumption is that all those Islamic and tribal forces, sectarian forces who are now basically competing with each other, have a positive relation to the concept of the nation state? Because that's the only way that they can fulfill the four criteria. If basically the nation state as a primary forum for social organization is accepted by them. And since I'm not an expert of the region, this is a question to you whether I can take this for granted. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think maybe I can make this up. Hi, thanks so much to everyone from the panel. It's been a real pleasure listening. Just in light of the recent report from the IAEA, perhaps I'll just ask a direct question. Perhaps, Mr. Silverman, if you could talk about the likelihood or possibility of any upcoming hostilities in the region. And if you can't talk about that, maybe someone else could take a stab. And just more generally, perhaps Mr. Silverman, you could talk about how Iran's strategy in pursuing its nuclear program and what kind of perceived threats it's responding to or what kind of aims it's hoping to achieve.
Okay.
I think we have enough for the four panelists, so we're going to return to our speakers in reverse order. Erzsébet, that makes you first.
Thank you, Emily. I will be very fast, and I think there were two that relate to me. I take on the Central European one, obviously. Inclusive structures, it's a good idea, but I think we were lucky enough to have these inclusive structures coming from outside Central Europe. I must tell you that it saved us a lot of trouble that all of us wanted to join the EU and NATO. If that was not there, that aim, I am not sure that everything has gone that smoothly. Especially taking into account that there were countries that were formed then for the first time in their lives, which means, of course, that a country at first has to define who I am and then can formulate different policies, and especially us Hungarians did have some trouble with that. However, because of the EU and NATO, I think, which were inclusive enough, although not fast enough in our perception, but inclusive enough, we could avoid these problems, and the problems that we are having can be very well managed. I fully agree that it would be a good idea to have such structures here in the Middle East, and maybe this conference will be one way to start, go forward with an arms control or else. The other one is disarmament, and I agree fully with you that the biggest concern is in some of these countries, especially Libya, also Iraq, and some others, that weapons are flowing around. And interestingly, it will be a new kind of exercise, I think, for the whole of the region and for the international community as well, since, as I said, arms control, but also most of disarmament is still done by state actors. So what to do when you don't have, or when you have a state actor information? Thank you very much.
Well, as to the Turkish model, of course, every society and state is different, and they will have their own model. But at the same time, it's very clear what do we mean when we say the Turkish model. We compare it to the Iranian model. There is one model of an Islamic state and another model that is a little bit more complicated, in my opinion, than Carlos' definition, because it's not only an Islamic party operating within a democratic system, it has also an important economic element, because the Turkish model was not so attractive without economic success. And that means a full free market system. Because when you look at Iran, for example, although in the face of it is also a free market, it's not really a free market. An economy in which such a huge part of it is, for example, owned by the Revolutionary Guards, is not a free market economy. As to the question of Palestine and Israel were not on the agenda, I am afraid it is an optical illusion. It is an optical illusion because what was on the agenda was the nature of the regime. But what was the problem of the regime? The problem of the regime was that it was authoritarian, corrupt, and didn't take into account or didn't count the people, the views of the people. The views of the people when it concerns social economic issues, but also the views of the people when it concerns foreign policy issues. So when Israel-Palestine issues became an issue, then it kicked in. Now we want you to listen to us. And the last point that I want to relate to is the comment about the nature of the present government in Egypt as a reason for the opportunity that Israel has to improve its relations. It's true to some extent, but as was rightly said, I think there is a good chance that this part of the nature of the regime in Egypt will stay there for a long time. Once again, it is the Turkish model, the old Turkish model. Yeah, the old Turkish model. I don't believe that the military in Egypt will suddenly disappear. That is not going to happen. Not in the short term and the medium term, and which means that there will be responsible elements in the Egyptian government, the military, and possibly also other elements that you can work with. And I hope that my Egyptian friends will agree with me.
Mr. Silverman.
Sure. To respond on the question on Iran, I would strongly recommend taking a close look. Like I said, it's still a restricted document, but it's been leaked to the press, so you can read it. The report of the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. It's a serious, credible report. It has a whole section on possible ongoing military dimensions of the Iranian nuclear program. The Board of Governors of the IAEA, just to remind, are meeting later this week. I can't characterize what will happen there. If I could, then I'd probably be running out and trading in the currency markets. But I would say that, as I mentioned, there's ongoing, very close, very intensive consultations with all of our allies, with our partners. The Board of Governors is not like the UN Security Council. There are no veto rights there. tends to operate resolutions by consensus, but they also works by straight, simple majority votes as well. And so the U.S. is working very closely with Israel, one of our key allies, on fashioning the strongest possible result in that forum. It'll be a continuation of this pressure track. And you mentioned about conflicts. We never, neither country, Israel nor U.S. will take off options, but clearly what we're talking about right now is ratcheting up sanctions and pressure through that style of international engagement. I'll just mention one other thing, going back to the regional arguments, that people were saying that, maybe Turkey and Iran are getting closer, but if you read closely and look at the baby steps that are happening between Israel and Turkey, those countries are also getting closer, if you look very closely. And it's what I would say about that is it has all to do with national interests of those two countries, regardless of the government that's in power. That these are two democracies. The leaders tend to look at their national interests, and they see common interests out there in the midst of this turmoil, whether it's Syria, whether it's in Iran, whether it's elsewhere. And so you'll see joint recognition despite the current strained relations between the governments.
Thank you. And last word to Asha Sasser.
There are 5 points that I noted to relate to. First, the quote taken from the late Fred Halliday. Yes, I agree. These are movements for modernization. And this is an old story. We can go back to the late 19th century. And you talk about the great Islamic reformers, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani and then Muhammad Abdu. What essentially they were trying to do was to find an Islamic route to modernity. That's what Islamic reform was all about 120 years ago. We're still playing the game. And the question for the Islamists is not about going back to the 7th century. It's really about advancing along the route to modernity, but through an Islamic prism, without abandoning our essential identity, looking for an authentic Islamic route to modernity, which is very problematic. And how does one wed between these stresses of modernity and the Islamic authenticity at one and the same time? But basically, I agree that what he said about the Iranian Revolution was true, and I think the same can be said about the Islamist movements across the board. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. The second point is the Turkish model, the Erdogan model, the AKP model, doesn't matter what we call it really. We're talking about the same thing. And what it means is an Islamist party repeatedly being elected through a democratic process. Not what people say about the Islamists, one election, one time, once, or however it goes, that you don't have a second election, which is a model which is spoken about, must be said, more by Europeans than by Arabs. Arabs don't like the Erdogan model. And when Erdogan went to Cairo and told them to be secular, they sent him packing. Secularism in Arabic, Alemani, is a word which is contemptuous. It is equal to atheist. And it is a word not used in polite company. Mahmoud Abbas spent a long interview a few years ago explaining how he is not secular. So the AKP model, by the way, the AKP never ever in their ideology ever spoke about implementing the Sharia. Never. Whereas every single Muslim Brethren party speaks about Tatbiq al-Sharia, which is the implementation of the Sharia. The Arab Islamist parties and AKP are not in the same playing field. So it is a model, I would say, far more in the eyes of foreigners who would like the Arab Islamists to be like the AKP. And it is they who speak about the Turkish model far more than the Islamists in the Arab countries, with, I think, Tunisia being the one exception. Sure, there are different models and different cases, and every case should be discussed in its own right. Every Arab country is different to each other one, and the Islamist movements are all different in each place. However, what is interesting and hardly foreseen when the Arab Spring began is that all we're talking about is Islamist movements. So we say, okay, the Tunisian one is not the same as the Egyptian one, and the sectarianism in Syria is not the same as sectarianism in Iraq. All true. They're all different. But we are talking in each and every one of them of tribalism, sectarianism, and Islamic politics of one kind or another. And that is very significant. We would not have done that 10 years ago. We wouldn't even done that 5 years ago. And that is, I think, critical. The 1982 Turkish constitution in Egypt, the Egyptian army, I think, would love this idea. The problem is, it ain't going to work. And I think that we will probably have something more akin to the implementation of the politics of the constitution without that kind of constitution in practice. But it may look something very much along the lines that Shlomo was suggesting, and I'm sure that Israelis, in their heart of hearts, would hope for the sake of the peace treaty that it would be such. Are the sectarian groups loyal to the nation state? It depends where we're talking about, and again, they're not all the same. But I would say that there are two fundamental trends, contradictory, that have emerged in the Arab countries since I would say, the defeat of Pan-Arabism. On the ruins of Pan-Arabism, two contradictory trends have evolved. One is the territorial state, Egyptianism, Syrianism, and all these territorial identities, Palestinian, Jordanian, and all the rest. And people really do feel, and we did see this in the Arab Spring, that people are Tunisians and Egyptians. Absolutely true. But at one and the same time, the other trend, political Islam filling the shoes of Arabism that has left a huge vacuum behind. And you see these two forces essentially competing with each other across the board, from Morocco to the Gulf, where you have the nation state competing with these various Islamist or sectarian forces that challenge the regime, not necessarily the state. It's not the state they wish to dismantle. It's the regime that they wish to replace. While the framework of the state becomes the playing field for these various sectarian forces. Playing sectarian politics in Iraq, not dismantling Iraq. Playing sectarian politics in Lebanon, but not dismantling Lebanon. The same is true in Syria. Egypt is different because Egypt is not so sectarian, doesn't have such a sectarian formation like the countries of the Mashriq have. So I think there is a great loyalty to the state. But still, sectarianism is very strong, and it becomes a vibrant force of domestic politics without dismantling the state itself, but within the state. Those are the points I wanted to make. Thanks.
Thank you, Asha. I think this has been quite a fascinating discussion. I thank all the speakers, and everyone is invited to dinner outside in our foyer. Thank you.